Welcome to the Paid in Full podcast. I'm Devin Fadul, and in this show, I sit down with creators of all stripes who have decided to follow their passion and carve out a unique path to success. My goal is to dive into their stories, learn about their philosophies, and share their hard-earned wisdom. My guest today is Khe Hy, founder of the Rad Reads community and one of the top online creators. He's probably most famous for quitting a very lucrative Wall Street career in his mid-30s to become an entrepreneur and live a more fulfilling and healthy lifestyle. But he's not your typical hustle bro. As you'll see in this episode, where we cover everything from his net worth to his self-worth, he's introspective, sensitive, and supportive. Someone who I believe is successful in all the right ways. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Khe Hy. I'm a big fan, first of all. So thank you for everything you do. And I've blown through your podcast. Every episode I listen to, and a couple of them I listened to twice, including clearly my favorite one. I'm not going to say by far, but clearly my favorite episode is the one where it's just you and you kind of tell your money story. That's kind of like where I'm at professionally right now. But it's also, that vulnerability and just the stories, man, it was so powerful. And I think I tweeted about it when I first heard it, and I just listened to it again. And just like, I mean, this is incredible content, at least for me right now in my sort of stage of life and like kind of what I'm looking for. So selfishly and personally, big thank you.
Thank you for saying that, Devin. We always, amongst me and my colleague, we're just like, the real metric that we have for success is lives touched, people impacted, connections made. And it's not sexy. It's not super quantifiable. It's not very visible. But when someone says that in such an earnest and sincere way, that's like our mission. Mm-hmm. So I thank you.
Well, you're hitting that mission, or you're satisfying it, or whatever. At least for me, I can't speak to anybody else. But another thing is like I've kind of learned, like we have like somewhat similar backgrounds. Like my dad was an immigrant, both finance guys. I was a total like nerdy kid in high school. Like, so it might sound weird, but you're kind of like the big brother that I never had. Just kind of funny. It's awesome, man. Again, just like I'm being a bit too flattery right now, but It's just been really fun just kind of getting to know you and hearing your stuff. So thanks again.
I appreciate it. Where is your dad from, or where like ethnically are you originally from?
So my dad is Lebanese.
Lebanese. That would have been my guess.
And it's interesting. Like I don't know about you, but I had very little exposure to that culture growing up. I was never like the Lebanese guy. I basically look white, so I would never really stuck out.
Are you 100% Lebanese?
No, just my dad.
Got it.
Where was I going with that? So I never had that much of a connection to it. We ate the food. I went to the occasional Lebanese wedding and, had some family stuff, but I wasn't in it every day the way that, other immigrant families are from whatever culture. I don't know if you've talked about this all that much, but like, how much did you grow up as, in the Cambodian culture? Like, I think you said
It's a great question. So my mom is half white. And so I'm a quarter Caucasian and 3/4 Cambodian. And so a few things there. One is there's not a ton of Cambodians in New York City, believe it or not. There's just not that many Cambodians in America. And so, well, I'll start with the more obvious question, which is, when people see me, they don't know what ethnicity I am. And I always really enjoyed that because like, they know I'm not white, but I also don't get, it's kind of like what you pass as. And like people suspect that I'm Asian, but people know I'm not Chinese, Japanese, Korean. What is that? East Asian. And they also know that I'm not Indian because I don't like outright look Indian. At least I've been told I don't look Indian. And because there's this mix of being Caucasian, it kind of throws everything off, right? And so I always use that as kind of an advantage because I didn't, growing up as a kid of immigrants, I didn't want to be known as the Asian kid, right? And so it was nice to be like ethno-fluid in that regards. Like some people thought I'm like Brazilian, like people thought I'm like Persian is a common one. And so just like being ethno-fluid, I just made that term up, was like something I really leaned into so that I guess let's call a spade a spade. It's like, I didn't want people to be like, he's Asian, right? I think, in the 1990s, Asians are having like a big renaissance right now, like in American mainstream media. But in the 90s, Asians literally like, you're like Bruce Lee, basically, that's the only Asian, or Jackie Chan, right? And so I didn't want to be identified as Asian. Tangentially, my dad was, he survived the Cambodian genocide. And so he moved to the United States via France. And so we didn't have any family in the United States. We still don't have any family. I mean, we have some like distant cousins. And so my dad never really wanted Cambodia to be our identity because of what was happening there. And I suspect him coping with his loss and cultural adjustment and his financial fears and all that is like what's the point of being Asian or not? It just is like, let's just put food on the table, right? And let's not be woe is me. I survived a genocide or this or feel bad for me. It's just like, Asians are very kind of quiet in that way. They don't want to raise their hand and be like, hey, look at me, I'm Asian. Like you owe me this, you owe me that. So I think that there was some of that. And then there was a third factor, which is not that significant, but I think it's still worth mentioning, is that I went to an international school. And so being this like ethno-fluid person, everyone, I mean, there's an Ethiopian guy with a Swedish mom, it's kind of like Ibrahimovic, right? He's Swedish, but he looks, Eastern European, but he like speaks perfect English. You're just like, what the heck, So I think that there were a lot of kids like that, which was kind of cool in that like you weren't strange for being Palestinian, or you weren't strange for being Cambodian, or you weren't strange for being a part Black, part Swedish, right? So that was kind of normal. Again, I didn't really fully appreciate that while I was in that school, because I guess everyone hates their middle school, and like especially when you're a nerd and a loser. But then when I got to college, I'm like, oh, okay, this is what it's like to be like surrounded by white people.
So Yale wasn't that multicultural?
Well, definitely not compared to an international school. Definitely not compared to the East Village of New York City. It's more like Yale exposed me to that kind of traditional, like waspy Irish Catholic kind of country club. Like being a mixed race kid living in the East Village, things that are predominantly white culturally are just like, I'm not like country clubs and like ski trips, summering, and like having a second home. Like there's just things I just never, playing golf, there's just not exposed to. And so you get to Yale, and then I think like the biggest shock for me at Yale was that the kids there had been talking about going to Yale with their parents for like large swaths of their lives. And like to me, my dad, again, one of the great advantages of growing up kind of quote unquote ignorant to many of those customs was that my dad no one ever told me I had to go to college. I mean, they were like, you'll go to college, but they didn't care where I went. They just thought that you like open a phone book and you pick a college, and then you just like, you pick that one, or you pick the one you can afford, right? There wasn't this whole, should your kids go to Yale or this or that. And then I think when I got there, I was like, wow, like your dads have been like telling you what they do for work your whole lives. Like my dad never told me what he did for work. It was like just not what we talked about. And they're like, yeah, you guys understand what stocks are? It's like your dad's talked to you about stocks when you were 10. Like, what the fuck? So I think that was the culture shock. So coming from an international school, being in this kind of waspy world for the first time, and yeah, it's pretty diverse, but it's still probably like when I went, probably like 15% minorities. So it didn't feel that diverse.
Hey guys, just a quick break to let you know this podcast is sponsored by my company, Adda Financial. You hate personal finance, and rightfully so. Let Adda handle the boring stuff, like investments, student loans, and insurance, so you don't have to. To learn more, check out the link in the show notes or go to addafinancial.com. Now back to the show. How'd you pay for Yale?
My parents had always we had this middle class arbitrage. And so let me explain what I meant by that. They lived in a rent controlled apartment in New York City, which means that we never paid market rent. And then as time went by, the difference between the market and what we were paying I'll put it in context. I think they pay $1,700 for the place that they live in now. It's 3 bedrooms, 800 square feet. That's where we grew up. The market value of that place is 10 grand. So we always paid below market rent. My mom got a job at the private school that we attended. So we got to go there for free. And that school, I think when we went was 8,000 a year. I think now it's like 20,000 a year. So what it's not the super elite private schools, but it's a nice private school. So right there, that's another 16 grand saved. And my mom's teacher salary was probably like 40 grand. Um, and then the UN paid for vacation. They call it home leave. The UN has phenomenal benefits. And my dad worked at the UN. So they pay for home leave, which is you get to go to your home country every 2 years because most people are not living in their home country. They're not from New York City. And so they pay for a vacation every 2 years. If you can't go to your country because of war, then you can go to, it's the silliest rule, but you could go to the country next to it. So like, so we went to Thailand. That was like a paid vacation to Thailand. I've been to Thailand like 10 times. So that was the second arbitrage. And then the third arbitrage was that the UN paid for 80% of your kids' college tuition.
Wow.
So if you think about that, like my parents have probably like arbitraged just dollars wise, maybe like $500,000, maybe close to $1 million. And I think part of it's that like immigrant hustle. I think part of it's just luck, like being in the right place and then leaning into your luck. So that's kind of the story of how, so I went to college, and I think it's a really important thing to say is that, we grew up lower middle class, but again, this arbitrage, my parents probably eked out an extra $1 million just from playing the game right. And then I went to college with zero debt. And so I could start, I was earning since I've been in high school, but I was earning and then I never had debt. And so it's just this like a headwind that's removed, no debt, and a tailwind that like I was good with money, I was earning money, and I knew how to invest. And so I think it's a really important thing for people to hear my story because that doesn't always get communicated so explicitly. They're just like, oh, he worked hard, he invested. Like, yeah, he did. But there are also all these other kind of parts, scaffolding that kind of set the stage for it to happen.
Yeah, and I love that. And thanks for bringing that up because that kind of segues into maybe my biggest question of this whole conversation is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're known as the guy who quit his 7-figure job,
Yep,
right?
that's fair.
And I would imagine, including myself, if I'm being honest, you look at either that headline or you hear the 5-minute version of your story and you think, lucky bastard, he probably lives in this perpetual state of just relaxation and bliss all the time. He's surfing, he's taking it easy. But for me, I take a few more seconds to think about that, and I know that that's not the case. And you've done a phenomenal job, and I've said this before, of kind of sharing some of the downsides of that lifestyle. But I'm wondering if there's something that you haven't been able to or haven't been willing to share publicly at any point of like, what are some other maybe, big or small, some downsides to this lifestyle? A good example, maybe an easy example, is healthcare. Like healthcare is really expensive if you don't have a day job.
Yeah.
That's kind of an obvious one. So maybe, I don't know, maybe something you have to do with your relationship with your wife, maybe being a dad, or maybe the relationship with your own parents. Again, kind of tell that story of, the reality of the way that you're living.
Okay. I think that's a wonderful question. Let's see. I'm sure I've mentioned bits of it, but I haven't like indexed hard to it. I would say, what are some of the things that are hard? I think that there's a few important people in my life, and I don't want to specify who they are, but just people who are important to me that I don't have a close relationship to. So part of it might be because of things that might have happened, and part of it might be because I might be stubborn or I might be unwilling to look past things that have happened in the past. And so that would be one thing. It's like, yeah, there are these important people in my life, and like, yeah, you could have all the money in the world, but like that's not gonna help with whatever forgiveness needs to happen, whatever healing needs to happen, whatever has been said or not said over the years, whatever distance that has grown. Right. So I think that's an important one, is that, I think people always assume like, oh, if you have a lot of money, then, you must be really happy. And like, to tell you the truth, like I am a very happy person, but I think I was a very happy person before I had money. So like, I think I'm happier with more money. But I think if I was an unhappy person before I had money, I think I would still be fundamentally an unhappy person. But that's a different conversation. So I think that's one thing, is like relationships. I think another thing that's along the lines of relationships is that it's not easy to be married. And I've known my wife since 2007. So that's 16 years. We've had 2 kids. and we have experienced a lot in that period. I specifically remember there was a moment during COVID when, and I'm happy to share all of our relationship kind of ups and downs that we've had. Again, mostly ups, but the downs were downs. But there's a moment in COVID when we weren't getting along. I think, it was like the general COVID thing where it's just like, get out of my face. Everyone's frustrated. Life is hard. Life is scary. And we had kind of gotten into this fight. And I don't remember who said it first. I think it was me, but I'm not sure. But we were both thinking it. And we turned to each other and we're like, what if we're not the right people for each other? And it wasn't like, I hate you. Not at all. It was just like, what, we keep having this recurring fight. And what if that fight's not fixable? And I think that the scary thing of that is that we're both like very high agency people that like, if we ever were in a job we didn't like, we would leave, like we would try to work through it. We don't quit on the first impulse, but if it's like fundamentally flawed, we would walk away from it. Right. So I think that there was a moment there where it was very scary. It was kind of like, should we get divorced? And I don't think if like 10 is like, you're going to do it the next day and 1 is like, you just like making shit up. I think it probably was like a 4 maybe, or a 5. But for someone who kind of like always like believes that he has his stuff together, it's like a 5 is terrifying, like, I mean, you go through all these places. Like, am I broken? Am I flawed? Like, am I incapable of being a good husband? Like, what did I do wrong? And then you go through these other phases. Like, I can't believe this person doesn't see me. Like, I have a good heart. I'm trying so hard. And like, as you say, you realize like so many of it is like projection, right? It's like projection from some deeper need, yearning that we have that we're projecting onto our partner. They have a deeper need, yearning, pain, wound, whatever, a collection of all those that they have. And so we're projecting this stuff onto each other. And at the core of it, I think, we're fundamentally like insecure about just being human, right? And again, it wouldn't have been this like, fuck you type thing, but it was just like, God, like how sad would that be if like the universe told us that we were actually not meant to be together, right? And that's something that has like been in and out of our minds at different times, at different levels of intensity, sometimes more for me, sometimes more for her. Sometimes we don't even talk about it, so I don't even know who it's more for. So I think that would be a very real example where it sucks. It's scary. It sucks. It's scary. You question everything. You play out these disaster scenarios where it's like, oh my God, like, what if we had joint custody of the kids and it's like some other guys raising my kids like 5 days out of the week. And like, I don't have that like manly, like, I'm the only man in your life type personality, but still just like the thought of like some other dude like disciplining your kids, you're just like, what the fuck, So you start to like play out that side of things. So I would say that would be probably one of the things, one of the phrases you've probably heard me say is like, money can only solve money problems. And most of my money problems are solved. And I feel very lucky, extremely privileged that that's the case. I also feel very lucky that most of my money problems are solved because I don't have ridiculous financial desires. Like someone asked me the other day, what's the most expensive thing you ever bought? I couldn't come up with anything over $1,000. I've spent like $40,000 on like a 3-month trip, but I've never bought, besides a car, right? I've never bought anything above $1,000 that I could remember. My wife's engagement ring was the only thing I could think of. So like, you just do the math. You have a few years of making 7 figures. You have a hard time buying anything over $1,000. You're a good investor. Like your money problems are solved.
Yeah.
Other things I think that will start to arise. I mean, again, my father-in-law passed away 3 weeks ago. So
sorry to hear that.
So thank you. First death of a parent in our family. So you quickly, it's like, I mean, yeah, it was nice to have money because we could like fly back and forth just to be with him and all that. So I feel very blessed that like that was important. That's money solving a problem. But at the same time, the overwhelming grief and the questions and the regret and the what ifs and the, I mean, that's just, yes, you can spend money to go to therapy, which I do, but you start to see that it's like there's a limit to what money can solve. I think one that is a really fascinating one. So this story I've never told because it makes me super uncomfortable. But yeah, I've spoken about how I have like a giant bald spot in the back of my head. I also speak often about how I have a six pack as a 44-year-old. And so it's like two very interesting juxtapositions, right? Because you can feel really, really proud of one thing and then really, really ashamed of the other. And they're kind of always happening at the same time. And we know because of the negativity bias, something that you're ashamed of is going to bring you way more shame than the pride that something you're proud of will bring you. So net, that's a loser to, like, the abs are a loser to me. And then like in that net like happiness thing. So you go to Kmart or Target and you do the self-pay. And you know how there's that camera that's like, it's like 6 feet up. That camera flat, it's like the bald spot camera. It's just like no, it's like a drone that just like knows where my bald spot is. It just like sits there and it just mocks me. And I refuse to look at it. I refuse to make eye contact with that camera. Sometimes I refuse to even go to self-checkout just to not have to put myself in that situation. I just say that because like no amount of money will make that shame go away. That's like not a money problem for me. That's me coping with my appearance, my sense of self, my body, mortality. Look, I've investigated. Can I use money to make that problem go away? Guess what? Tiger Woods has more money than me. He can't make that problem go away. So until I'm willing to look at myself in that Target camera, I'm not a free person. I'm not free. And what's the point of having money if you're not free? Or maybe said differently, money can't buy you certain kinds of freedom.
Ooh, that's good shit, man. And it resonates with me on so many levels, least of which because I'm dealing with similar.
Yeah, well, you're looking good, man. So
hey, there's a lot of work went into this.
Yeah.
So more of the story is like that resonates so much. I also like to stay in shape. I'm 38. I've got a six pack. It's I can't believe I'm saying this, but like it's really important to me.
Yeah.
It's really important to me. I want to have that. I cut the grass yesterday. I took my shirt off.
Yeah. I use no excuse. For me, the arbitrage is shirt off, hat on. And then I'm like running down Manhattan Beach and I'm just like dad fucking showing off. So yeah, no, I know. And it's, thank you for sharing that. Cause like I didn't even talk about this for like a decade. And so, and think about this, like if we feel this way as men, imagine the way a woman must chew herself out for imperfections that are way less worse than a bald spot, right? That gave me like the minute I realized how much shame and embarrassment I had and what the lengths that I went through to avoid ever encountering that, then I'm like, oh my God, not even women, girls, young girls are dealing, like, I look at myself in the mirror and I'm not happy, And like I said, the deck is really stacked in my favor. Look at a young girl and like, God, and then her entire life, there's some version, and it's like so much worse because like, if you and I shaved our heads, like we were like, whatever, like, yeah, it looks different, but like, who cares? So it really gave me a lot of empathy because I was that guy that would, talk shit about how people looked when I was younger and make fun of people when I was even younger. So yeah, anyway, that's definitely something I've never said on a podcast before. So good question.
Thanks for sharing, man. This is exactly what I'm kind of looking for. This is the number one reason why I have this podcast, to have conversations like this. I'm curious because for me, I grew up, as a fairly normal, just kind of Mr. Macho, and like feelings are bullshit. Therapy's a joke. You talked to me 3 years ago. I probably am not even broaching any of these subjects.
No, that was me. Yeah, that was me 9 years ago.
So my question is yeah, when did that happen? Because you're leaning, correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't been following you for that long, but you're leaning hard into this sharing mode. When did that start? Like Why now? What's the story behind that?
I think similar to you in that I definitely didn't have the macho thing because I was too insecure. But, culturally, my dad still, I see him, he's like, hey, it's like, how's BlackRock stock doing? I'm like, Dad, I haven't, it's been 9 years. Like, I don't own any BlackRock stock. I don't talk to Larry Fink, or, he'll send me articles of Larry Fink, like total like dad move. Um, but we kind of grew up in this culture, in our family culture, that, and I think it's because there was tremendous loss on my dad. Like my dad, basically, the entire side of his family got killed in the Khmer Rouge Civil War, or genocide. So I think there was a starting point of just like, you don't do that. Also, generationally, right? I'm Gen X, technically. I always say I'm a Gen X, but I behave like a millennial. So I'm Gen X. I mean, Gen X is a very much like not a generation of therapy, still like a very kind of macho, very patriarchal, like, a lot more kind of like stay-at-home moms, in that generation. Very much like, oh, like dad goes golf and like wife watches the kids. Like that's kind of like that's Gen X. I mean, people I think I behave younger than I am in many regards, but like my peers are much more like that. And so again, I say that because like so immigrant, like from an Asian perspective, Cambodian perspective, like not really taught to speak much. From a Gen X perspective, we're kind of more like boomers than Gen X is more like boomers than millennials, according to the tropes. So yeah, showing emotion is a sign of weakness was kind of it's either a sign of weakness or it's unnecessary. I think it was unnecessary. Like that was the message from my parents, unnecessary. And then when you get to Wall Street, sign of weakness. And I think too, in hindsight, it takes a whole special set of skills to be able to share vulnerably and be vulnerable and be authentic, right? There is this weird like self-confidence that's required to be vulnerable, or at least I've found it. I feel like the more confident I became, the more willing I was to be vulnerable. And maybe that's natural. I'd have to play that one out. So basically my whole Wall Street career, and I think that's where I was starting to splinter, because I'm just like, I want to have real conversations with people. Like let's stop pretending. And I've definitely found people that I could stop pretending with. My Wall Street days was like, a lot of the relationships outside of work were like centered around alcohol. So I was either an alcoholic or very close to an alcoholic. I don't think I was an alcoholic because I felt like if I ever wanted to say I choose to stop drinking, I will stop, like I have now. But all the other signs were there. So it was hard to have relationship, to be authentic, when, anything that feels uncomfortable, you just mask it with like tons of alcohol. I think when I quit, I don't know what happened. I think there was a turning point where when I quit 9 years ago, it was kind of like basically when medium.com started. And it was really, before that point, blogging had really been kind of more of like a nerd's, because you still had to know how to set up a WordPress site or know about, the different blogger apps, Tumblr. Like it was still like a subculture. And I never realized this until now, but I feel like medium.com was kind of like, it kind of said like everyone can be a blogger. And it didn't say it was true. And even though my blog wasn't on Medium, it kind of, I think I coincided with that movement. I also coincided with a part where I had like much more self-confidence. And it coincided with a part where I was in transition. So a lot of these feelings were coming up. And it coincided with the first time that I it wasn't therapy, it was life coaching, but I spoke to someone about what was on my mind first time. So I think that confluence of events was unique to me being okay with it. I think that I also I'm a very sensitive person. And so I think it was always there. It just needed the dam needed to be punctured and for that to just kind of come out. So if you're a newish follower, but for people that have been following me for a decade, there's always been a deep, if you go back, probably the most poignant episode I ever did was on the Reboot podcast with Jerry Colonna, where we just talked about my fear of death for like 90 minutes. So I've always been willing ever since then, it's been packaged in different ways. So I think that would be the starting point. And I think the second thing was, I mean, you could call this a business thing or a product market fit thing, was the more I did of the vulnerable stuff, that was where people would gravitate. Like that elicited the biggest response in people. So I think either subconsciously or consciously, the business side of me was like, oh, if you write a list about, 8 productivity tools, 1,000 people read it. If you talk about how your wife might leave you, 5,000 people. And it sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but you don't really realize that when you're in it. And I think it's gotten to the point where I just don't even know. Like that came up, the Target story. It's like I've been waiting to tell it because it's a very real thing that I face often. And I know that someone else feels that shame. I know it. I think as a writer, I think one of my strengths as a writer is I feel like I really do understand other people's struggles, especially like in my cohort of people. And so if I can make one person feel less alone in that target moment, then that's why I write, is to get that connection with people and make them feel less alone, make them feel more seen, make them feel valued. And I think that's what's made my writing unique. I think that's what's made my trajectory. Because even when I was the productivity guy, people really struggled to label me as the productivity guy because I would talk about all these other things. And now I think it's the opposite, where I'm just like, I'm getting rid of all the labels. I'm the nothing guy. And I'm just going to do what I want to do, talk about what I want to talk about. And some days it's like the power of AI. And then other days it's why I hate the self-checkout at Target.
Now that's a pretty recent development, right? Getting out of those
Yeah.
labels.
The productivity one, and that was partially like the backwash of a business decision, was that I had grown Rad Reads pretty fast to make money in online courses. And I think that was a classic example of chasing money and forgetting what you truly care about, and then kind of being stuck in the thing. Basically, that was a classic example of building your own jail. And luckily, it was unlucky at the time. The market collapsed, the stock market too, but the course market collapsed precipitously. And so the prison I had created for myself collapsed precipitously, which was, in hindsight, the greatest blessing. While it happened, it sucked. And now that I have some distance from it. So I think pulling the label off was like the last part, but it had started earlier, where this Khe as this type of entrepreneur had already been shattered.
Mm-hmm. That might have been the first piece of yours that I read, maybe. You
The
wrote a big piece about
$649,000
yeah,
pivot. Yeah.
yeah. Maybe it was one of the first for sure.
Okay, cool. You're a newbie, man. Newbie, but devoted. So
No, I
I
mean
love it.
I'm glad I'm in it. And I think that might have been through Chris A. I can't remember.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe because I am a money guy at the end of the day,
Yeah.
right? That's my business. That's what I love.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a frame of reference, so I run this practice that I started about 13, 14 months ago. It's financial advice, quote unquote, but I
Mm-hmm.
do everything different from mainstream. And I mean
Okay.
everything. All my clients are young. I pretty much only meet on Zoom. The way that
Mm-hmm.
I charge, it's a flat fee model. I mean, you have an advisor,
Okay.
so you get
Yeah.
it. And not that any of that is bad. I'm not saying it's
Yep.
bad. I'm just saying that I do it
Mm-hmm.
differently. And probably the single biggest differentiator is that I don't really focus on money as the number. I focus on it as the mindset. So my clients and we talk a lot about what money means to you. How do you feel about
Mm-hmm.
it? What are your dreams? What are your fears? What are your values?
Yeah.
And certainly we talk about, what benefits should you have and what should be invested in your 401k. But that, to me, that's like table stakes these days. Like that's the stuff that you
Yeah.
can Google or put in ChatGPT and it'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you feel about, and I know you've talked about this in other places, especially with Kevin D, who was on this podcast, by the way, a couple months ago. How do you feel about your money situation? You
Yeah.
probably, I probably don't have to like prime you, but like when you really think about it and you dig deep down and you close your eyes, you take a deep breath. When you think of your personal situation, what emotions come up?
Yeah. I feel good. I feel really good. Um, I think that, well, maybe I'll start with two stories that kind of like will help frame the conversation. So when I left 9 years ago, again, this is how much times have changed, but 9 years ago, that was like right at the ascent of Facebook. 9 years ago, the high status profession was to be a venture backed entrepreneur. That was a very, very high status thing. And if I think about why I quit, I think I probably just wanted to chase like a high status. Like that was my like glide path. It was like, oh, I'm gonna do this like discovery thing, but I'm gonna jump into another high status, high earning potential, HSHP, right? And so somewhere along that way, though, I had this realization. And keep in mind, too, this is because the Gen X's were still like ruling the roost back then, 9 years ago, was like to be a lifestyle entrepreneur, people laughed at you.
Hmm.
They were like, you're the loser entrepreneur. Like, you're the kind that can't make it. So that's how much has changed in 9 years. I had an epiphany in that moment. I was like, I didn't leave Wall Street to do another Wall Street like experience, working 90 hours a week and just high stress, high stakes. And so, again, I view these things as like an act of grace, an act of God. I'm not religious, but like an act from above. That someone came in and was like, "Yo, Khe needs a little redirection right here," and the redirection was, "Khe, you should be a lifestyle entrepreneur." I don't like no one told me that. I just realized it because I think a lot about freedom, right? That's why I said I may be rich, but I'm not free. Um, and so that was the first step towards freedom because I opted out of a very demanding game that would have been a huge constraint on my freedom. Especially, it was very important. My daughter had just been born. My daughter's going to be 10. I've only been away from her like 20 nights in her life.
Hmm.
I put her to bed like 3,600 nights minus 20 in her
Hmm.
life. I've put her to bed. That's what I wanted. That's the lifestyle that I wanted. So that was the first freedom point. So that sent me down this road of being a creator. And again, just for your audience's context, in 2009, like people weren't talking about like the creator economy at all. Everyone was on MailChimp. That should tell you like where we were in the cycle of things. Uh, sometime I said this on the Kevin podcast. You might have not like fully grasped it because it's just a passing statement. In my mind, though, I always had this concept that I would make more money as an entrepreneur than if I had stayed on Wall Street. It was like this internal scorecard, like literally with myself, although it was kind of with others. But in my mind, I was like, I'm going to basically make up the difference as an entrepreneur. Right. And I think in the past 10 years as an entrepreneur, I've probably made like net pre-tax like 500,000 in 9 years. And I probably, if I'd stayed on Wall Street, let's keep the math easy, I probably would have made like 1.5 million a year. So that's like 15 million. So you're looking at 500,000 versus 15 million. That's a big delta to it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't like as a 3-person business, you can't just like make 15 million happen, right? And I think I was getting worked up about that. But again, no one knew this. No one, you can understand this because you deal with people like me. If I explain this to Lisa, she's like, what's the difference between 5 million, 10 million? Like Lisa thinks this that like 15 million and 500 million are the same. Lisa, my wife, she thinks it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like you and I, we could like list all the gradations that are different between 15 million and $500 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of net worth. Right. She thinks it's literally the same thing. So if I'm like, yeah, I had this plan that in 9 years I was gonna like make this, she's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like you stop talking. You're gibberish. So I had this vision, and I think it was because I didn't want to lose the game. I wanted to like play a new game, but I didn't want to lose the old game. Again, I wasn't free because I was still trying to win it. I was trying to win an old game with new game tools. Like that's the classic bringing a knife to a gunfight, right?
Hmm.
Like, I mean, you just sit there, you make 1.5 million a year in W2 income. Like, there's no other world where that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I say that because this year, and I don't know exactly what happened, it might have been being on psychedelics was part of it. But this year I was like, I don't care about that anymore.
Hmm.
Another path closer towards freedom. I had freed myself from this literally an imaginary goal that no one cared about except me. And I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. And it was escaping with every passing year. The difference was really like the gap was widening, not narrowing as it should have been. So I tell you that because that gives you a good lens into my relationship with money. I think that I stopped being scared about like the scarcity of losing it all or not being able to live the way I want to. I think that stopped in the past 5 years. And we can talk about that because I know a lot of people feel that still. But for me, it's always been a scoreboard. And it's been a scoreboard because I still ascribe a lot of my self-worth to my net worth, even though I stopped playing the net worth game. So it's almost like you're like setting yourself up for failure, for misery, right? And so when that was let go, there was this real like peacefulness to it. I'm like, oh, I'm good. And I've talked about, I'm a very aggressive investor. Like I use leverage, like I'm always in equities. I invest in the liquids, like crypto. I'm an aggressive investor. I do not like to have a penny sitting idle. Like, so I'm a very aggressive investor and it served me very well. But I stopped kind of worrying. I stopped kind of thinking about how big the pot was as a measure of my own self-worth, which gave me a tremendous amount of freedom. I still feel like shit when I see my friends that make like $10 million a year. Yeah, I'll do like weird stuff. I'm like, oh my God. And like, they used to do this with athletes. Like, so they're like, in like 8 minutes, Ronaldo makes more than you made in your whole career, like, so I do that version of that with my friends. I'm like, during this lunch, he made what I made in a year, like, and I'll feel shitty, but I kind of like laugh it off at this point. So now, and I think another important thing is I do really believe in the die with zero, not 0, but I call it die with 0.2, like 0.2x. I like the 0.2 is like the buffer, but I'm going to pay for my kids' college. And that's like, I don't want to give them lots of money. I think it will hurt them more than help them. But again, the die with zero thing would mean that at 44, maybe you don't start eating into principle, but you definitely need to stop worrying about growth. But my self-worth still wants to see the number go up. But the die with zero part is like, this is when you need to start like letting off the gas. And so I have a thing, like I have a bunch of assets that like pay, dividends and interest and stuff. So I basically live off of, because I can't cover my living expenses off of my Rad Reads salary. But if you take my Rad Reads salary plus my dividends plus my interest distributions, then I can easily.
Without touching principal.
So without touching principal. Then I'm like, well, I'm not reinvest because, like if you say my S&P divs are like 1.8%, I think, dividend yield. But if you assume like S&P annualizes at 6% a year, like I'm taking 2 of those percent off the table by not reinvesting the dividend yield and to spend it today. So that's kind of like my, I'm not getting the full 6-7% growth. Maybe I'm getting 4 if you like take off the dividend yield, reinvesting the dividend yield. So like those are kind of like the little games. Those are like the things that I'm thinking about.
Oh man, I'm trying to not go down that route, but I really want to go like hardcore like finance guy.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I literally am not going to say anything because we will talk about that for the next 5 hours. I guess the only thing I'll say is like, I would imagine your advisor is involved in this, and like, man, like I'm jealous because that's like such an interesting kind of problem set.
He's actually not,
or whatever. Oh, he's not. Wow.
I mean, he's not because I don't need him. I don't ask for his advice.
I was going to ask who's doing what, and
it's all me.
Interesting.
And yeah, the advisor that I have is much more. It's for access to private funds.
Okay.
It's a friend. He's a friend of mine, and you've heard him on one of the episodes.
Yeah.
And the biggest reason for the advisor is good margin rates, good access to private funds. It's like white glove, like all my wires, life insurance, like all of. I just never have to. I've never had to like initiate a wire personally. And but the most important one was if something were to happen to me, I would want Lisa to just have one person to call. That's why I have an advisor. I want Lisa to have one person to call if something happens to me.
Feel free to shut me down, but how are you paying him? Is it percentage of assets or is
it's percentage of assets? So it's like it's the dollar amount that I pay him is not worth the tangible service that I get, but to me, it's like going to a Four Seasons. Like this coffee is not worth $12,
Mm,
but it makes me so happy in this moment that like I don't care that it's $12.
yeah.
That's how I view my advisor. And this is to me, this is my rich life. Like the fact that I never have to worry, some people like, they'll like sit down and go through with their wife. If something happens to me, this is the brokerage account here. This is this is where the crypto is. Like for me, I'm like, I don't want to have that. My wife doesn't want to have that conversation. I don't want to have that conversation. My rich life is knowing that we don't need to ever have that conversation and we'll
Mm,
be fine.
mm,
My other rich life is like all the little bits and pieces in my life, funding capital calls, making insurance payments, seasoning the cash for my insurance trust. They're all like $10 tasks. I never want to think about them. And I'm
mm,
willing to pay money to not. And then the big one, I joke, but like, I have to move cash around a decent amount because of different investments that I make. They'll fill out the forms for me, like all that. They're just boom, done. It's like
mm,
that's worth so much. And again, if you were to look at it, you'd be like, okay, you're paying like $7,000 a year for someone to make like 8 wires for you. Like that's $1,000 a wire. And the wires are probably like 50K, that's 2% of each wire. And I'm like, yeah, but I never have once had to get on the phone with my bank in the past year. Like that's worth $7,000 to me.
mm. You said rich life a minute ago, which I'm a huge
Yeah.
believer in. My rich life is kind of branded money vision. We go through this
Mm-hmm.
exercise with my clients. I'm curious, what are some of the other aspects of your rich life? And let's try to not
Yeah.
think about the numbers for a second. One of my money vision, it's on my vision board, is just being able to go out to dinner with friends or family and just pay the bill and not have to
Mm-hmm.
worry about it.
Yep.
I guess it is money related at the end of the day, but it also kind of dovetails with this idea of freedom. Assuming that your rich life and freedom are the same thing
Yeah.
for a second, what are some of the things that you either are so grateful that you do have that ability right now, and or some things that you're looking forward to having as part of your rich life?
Yeah. It's a wonderful, wonderful question. And I'm glad that you're pressing me on the specifics. Um, so the biggest rich life thing for me is not having to set an alarm. So I haven't set an alarm in the 9 years other than to surf or to travel. So that's a rich life moment for me.
Can you
I
can you
think,
compare that to what I think your lifestyle was before you
I mean,
quit?
I would wake up at like 4:45. I would be hungover. I'd do CrossFit, I'd network and all that. The crazy thing is that I still work like 35 hours a week. It's just very much on my own terms, right?
Mhm.
And very targeted. I think my output for 35 hours is I would put my output up against anyone else's like unit of work per hour work. Um, so that's one. I would say another one is this is one for our family. We can walk our girls to school. If anyone has kids, living walking distance to a school is a rich life thing. I can walk to the beach. So I probably pay a $2,000 a month premium to live walking distance to the beach in rent. So like I said, I've never bought anything over $1,000, but I will spend $2,000 a month of premium to be walking distance to the beach. That would be another one. Let's see, what are some other ones? We never think about the price for like high quality food. So like organic stuff, grass fed, like we spend a lot of money on food. I'll get to the ones that I wish I could get to. Most of the things that I can't do now are the function of being a father and not the function of money. So I would love to go on like a 7-day surf trip to Indonesia. And I can afford it and my job allows it. My wife would actually probably be okay with it. I just don't want to be away from my kids for 7 days.
Mhm.
So most of my freedom or lack of freedom is the result of wanting to be with my kids and not something financial. Again, a huge place of privilege. So that would be another one. Spending food. And then I think one thing where we don't have a rich life is I still have a block about like air travel. Like my wife would love if we would like consider flying business. I don't, I have that very like kind of immigrant. I'm just like, what's it's just the trip doesn't start till you get to the place. And my wife is like, the trip starts the minute you leave your home.
Mm,
And I think she's right. To me, like flying nice, like doesn't matter. Like I'm just
mhm,
so content to just like be on my, like, I'm just on my fucking phone. Like it doesn't matter if there's like two
mhm.
people next to me or one person next to me. So I think that would be one, the ability to travel, higher quality traveling. Oh, one last rich life one is that we have two cleaning ladies. So we have a cleaning lady that comes weekly that's more like a declutterer and just the kitchen. And then we have like the deep clean, like toilets, shower, everything. Like they come twice a month. So that's definitely a rich life thing. And then I surf. I have a trainer. Like I do these group training lifting classes, and I'm part of a yoga studio. So I have like three workout studios. So I probably spend like $500 a month, $400 a month, in addition to the $2,000 rent premium on like personal fitness stuff. And so again, like but I've never bought a pair of sunglasses over $200. Yeah.
Look, man, I keep saying this, but like I feel pretty much exactly the same way. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care about stuff. Like my wife bought me this, but like once I kind of make it, and like I'll know I'm
Mm-hmm.
living my rich life once like neither of us are cleaning the bathroom anymore. I'm willing to spend my money on convenience more than pretty much anything,
Yep.
right? Saving time. Anyways, I'm right. I'm right there with you, brother. On so many levels. Listen, I know you got to go. We're up on time, but I did want to plug your stuff. So you got the
Yeah.
podcast. You do coaching. Quick, maybe 90 seconds
Yeah.
on kind of what you're doing in
Mm-hmm.
terms of revenue generating things and like
Yeah. Of
how can I send
course.
my audience to you?
Of course, of course. So thank you for that. The main place is the newsletter. I've been writing this newsletter for 418 consecutive weeks. So we're gonna hit like we're running the corner on 9 years, but I like to say we're like it's gonna be a decade soon, which is just a crazy thought. It's still like 50% open rate, 50,000 people read it. It's so definitely go there, radreads.co. And then the podcast is like our latest project, and we've recorded 28 episodes already. Feeling great about it. The conversations are awesome. It's just, I'm having fun. So that's the Examined Life podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. I'm super active on Twitter, even though it's kind of turned into a bit of a hellhole, and less active on Instagram and LinkedIn. So those are my main things. And I'm trying to record one YouTube video a week for 50 weeks because I like telling stories and I have useful perspectives, I think. I just don't know how that, I know there's a home for that on YouTube. I just don't know what it looks like. It's not just me
Mhm.
talking to a mic or something. So I want to try to figure that out because I do believe that YouTube is just like a really incredible medium that I owe it to myself to try it out. In terms of our offers, so we still teach our course. We have our productivity course. It's all self-paced now. So that's called Supercharge Your Productivity. I do a very small kind of invite only one-on-one coaching. It's mostly hedge fund managers and exited founders that are kind of like a lot of it is around this relationship with money. So I do that. And then I have a men's group that's the similar audience that's invite only. And then we run group coaching programs on a cohort basis that are similar concept, but it's a little less like it's not so specific to that archetype. And the reason why I do that archetype is because I know that group very well. I understand them well, and they have a very unique set of problems that are very unrelatable to the rest of the population. And so that's why that's kind of like cordoned off in this like kind of more like private invite only type things. And then group coaching, which you can if you go to radreads.co/coaching, that's where we run different cohorts, and it's similar questions around mindset, your relationship with money, relationship with work, and your relationships period.
Hmm. I didn't realize how many streams there were in the business.
Yeah, well, two of those I never talk about.
Hmm. And one I don't think I've ever heard was the men's group. My ears kind of perked up. So Anyways, man, this was amazing. Thank you so much. I loved
Yeah.
it. Let's stay in
Thank
touch.
you,
Let's try to
man.
do round two at the very least.
Yeah, I'll see you in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I'll see you in Yinzerville. And if there's anything I can do, let me know. I'd love to help out in any way.
Thanks, brother. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, man. Take care.
Bye.